He spent the night in another woman's bed while his wife was home alone recovering from nearly dying giving birth to his child. He came back with a rehearsed lie on his lips and cologne that wasn't his wife's favorite. He walked through the front door of his $10 million mansion and found nothing. No furniture, no photographs, no crying infant, no wife. Just the open mouth of an empty safe staring back at the most feared mafia boss in Chicago. For the first time in 20 years, Vincent DeLuca understood what it felt like to lose something he believed no one would ever dare take. If this story already has your pulse running, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what Claire did that morning was only the beginning. Ditch. The penthouse on North Michigan Avenue had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made Chicago look like something built for Vincent DeLuca's personal enjoyment. 42 floors up, the city spread itself out in every direction. The dark ribbon of the river, the frozen geometry of the lakefront, the arterial glow of the expressways pushing light through the pre-dawn fog. From up here, everything looked orderly, controlled. He stood at the window with a glass of water, not bourbon. He had stopped drinking before bed years ago, too many mornings lost to slowness, and he could not afford slowness, and watched the city wake up beneath him. 6:14 in the morning, January. The kind of cold that made Chicago feel like a punishment. Madeline was still in the bed behind him, one arm draped across the white sheets, dark hair across the pillow. She was 31 years old, an art consultant he had met at a fundraiser 2 years ago, and she had learned early that asking questions about his schedule was something she did not get to do. She had learned other things too. How to be available when he needed her to be and invisible when he needed that instead. She was very good at both. He picked up his phone from the nightstand without looking at her and checked his messages. 47 unread. 3 from his attorney, Richard Moss, 2 from his head of security, a man named Dario Falcone, who communicated in clipped, efficient sentences that contained nothing unnecessary. 1 from his accountant. The rest were operational, organizational, the ordinary noise of running an empire that officially did not exist. He texted Dario, "On my way back, 90 minutes. Then he dressed in the dark, moving quietly from habit rather than consideration for Madeline, and walked out. The elevator ride down was 42 floors of silence. He used those seconds to compose himself the way he always did, going over the lie in his head, smoothing its edges, making sure it fit cleanly over the truth without any visible seams. He had told Claire he was at a late strategy meeting with his partners, followed by an unavoidable overnight at the River North office because of a security situation that required his physical presence. Plausible. She would not call Dario to verify it. She knew better than to call Dario. He stepped out of the lobby into the January air, and it hit him like a wall. His driver, a man named Tomas, had the car running. Black Escalade. Tinted windows. The engine had been idling long enough that the interior was warm by the time Vincent slid into the back seat. "Home," he said. Tomas said nothing and pulled out into the empty street. Vincent looked out at the city as it passed. He was 53 years old, built narrow and precise the way certain men stay when they never stop moving, with silver at his temples and a face that people described afterward as unreadable. He had been running the DeLuca organization since he was 34, inheriting it from his uncle, a man named Corrado, who had built it across 30 years of careful brutality and then handed it to Vincent because Vincent was the only one in the family who understood that the cruelest thing power could do was look like something else entirely. Under Vincent, the DeLuca organization had become almost invisible. No headlines, no dramatic arrests that made the evening news, no bodies found in parking lots. He had insulated the operation behind 17 layers of legitimate business: real estate, logistics, medical supply contracting, a small private equity firm that moved money with remarkable efficiency. The FBI had been circling him for 6 years. They had circled and found nothing they could hold on to. He was not afraid of them. He was not afraid of anything. That belief was so deep inside him that he had stopped recognizing it as a belief at all. It had become simply the air he breathed. The Escalade crossed the river and headed north and west toward the suburb where the DeLuca estate sat behind its iron gate and its manicured winter hedges. 11,000 square feet, 6 bedrooms, a wine cellar, a private security room with cameras covering every angle of the property. He had bought it 4 years ago, before Claire, because a man in his position needed a certain kind of residence, one that communicated something to the people who needed to understand his standing, and communicated nothing at all to everyone else. Claire had been his wife for 3 years. He had met her at a charity gala. She had been working as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial at the time, attending the event with a colleague, and she was the kind of woman who made a room feel different by being in it without appearing to know she was doing it. Dark hair, steady hands, eyes that watched things carefully without broadcasting that they were watching. He had pursued her the way he pursued everything he wanted, with patience, with precision, and with the absolute certainty that patience and precision would eventually deliver the result. It had taken 4 months. By the end of the first year of marriage, he had restructured her entire existence without her fully realizing it had happened. Her nursing position went first. He had suggested gently that her hours were incompatible with the kind of household they were building together, and she had agreed with only a small hesitation that he had smoothed over with a trip to Florence. Then her finances. He had consolidated everything into accounts he controlled, providing her with a household allowance that was generous enough to feel like freedom while being monitored closely enough to prevent it. Her phone was on his account. He reviewed the records. He had not needed to restrict her contacts directly. He had simply made the social landscape around her contract naturally, the way things do when a woman's husband is Vincent DeLuca, and people understand instinctively what that means. She became pregnant 8 months ago. The pregnancy had been complicated from the beginning, hyperemesis, then a placenta issue that had kept her under medical supervision for the final trimester, then a birth that had nearly killed her and had sent the baby, Emma, to the NICU for 3 weeks. He had been present for the birth. He had stood in that delivery room and watched Claire fight to stay conscious, and he had felt, not love exactly, but something adjacent, a recognition that she was more durable than he had estimated, which he respected. Emma was now 2 months old. She was premature, still small, still sleeping more than waking, still in the careful territory of early infancy where everything felt fragile. Claire was still recovering. The postpartum period had been hard on her. She was exhausted in a way that went bone deep, and there were days when she moved through the house like a woman walking underwater. He had taken note of this. He had discussed it with Richard Moss. The Escalade turned onto the private road that led to the estate. The gate opened at Tomas's approach, motion sensor, keyed to the vehicle, and swung back to admit them. Vincent was already formulating the final shape of the lie, polishing the last details. He would be tired. He would be brief. He would check on Emma, say something appropriate about Claire's sleep, and move directly to the shower. By 8 o'clock, he would be in his office reviewing the morning's operational reports. Efficient, clean. The Escalade stopped in front of the main entrance. He stepped out. The front door was unlocked. He registered this as wrong before he understood why. The front door was never unlocked. Claire did not leave the front door unlocked. Even when she was home all day, even when the security team was in the gatehouse 40 yards away, the door was always locked. It had been drilled into her early in their marriage, and she had internalized it with the obedience that had made her, on balance, an acceptable domestic arrangement. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The foyer was the same. The marble floor, the dark wood paneling, the entrance table with the ornamental bowl where the household keys were kept. Everything the same. He took 2 steps further. The living room. The furniture was there. The sofas, the coffee table, the painting he had bought in Milan that hung above the fireplace. All there. But the photographs were gone. He stood very still. There had been photographs on the side table beside the sofa. A framed picture of Claire and Emma, taken at the hospital, Emma still wired with monitors, Claire barely upright with exhaustion, and something that might have been joy. Another frame. Their wedding photo, the one Claire had insisted on keeping in the main room rather than upstairs. Both gone. The table surface was bare and slightly dusty at the edges where the frames had been. He moved quickly now, down the east corridor, past the dining room, toward the back of the house where the nursery was. He had designed the nursery himself, or rather, he had approved the design, everything in pale green and white, a crib from a custom woodworker in Vermont, a changing table, a rocking chair Claire had picked out, and he had not objected to because it was an inexpensive preference to accommodate. He pushed the nursery door open. Empty. Not disorganized. Not searched. Empty. As in stripped. as in every item that had made it a nursery, was no longer present. The crib frame stood bare because even the mattress was gone. The changing table's surface had been cleared. The rocking chair was absent. The small wicker basket of swaddle blankets that had sat in the corner. The white noise machine. The mobile that had hung above the crib. All of it gone. He stood in the doorway of the empty nursery and felt something he had not felt in so long that it took him a full several seconds to identify it. Fear. Not the operational fear of a threat he could assess and counter. Something older. Something underneath the part of him that calculated and controlled. A cold recognition in the gut that something had happened which he had not anticipated and could not immediately explain. He turned and walked fast toward the master bedroom. The room was intact. Her clothes were still in the closet. Not all of them, he registered immediately. Some gaps where certain items had been removed, but the closet was not empty. The bed had been made. Her nightstand was cleared of the personal items she kept there. The small notebook, the hand lotion, the charging cable for the phone he paid for and monitored. He went to the walk-in safe in the dressing room. It was open. He kept $40,000 in emergency cash in that safe, along with 2 of Claire's pieces of jewelry that he had technically given her as gifts, but which he understood as assets. The cash was gone. One of the jewelry pieces was gone. A diamond bracelet worth approximately $18,000. The second piece, a string of pearls he had given her at their first anniversary, was still there, lying on the safe's velvet shelf like something deliberately left behind. He stared at the pearls for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Dario. Dario answered on the second ring because Dario always answered on the second ring. "She's gone," Vincent said. A beat of silence. "When?" "Sometime during the night. The nursery is cleared out. The safe's been opened. She took the baby." Another beat. Longer. "I'm pulling the camera footage now." "Do that." He paused. His jaw was tight in a way he recognized as the physical expression of something he would not name. "She didn't do this alone." "No," Dario agreed. "Find out who helped her." He walked back through the master bedroom and out into the corridor, moving now without purpose, which was unfamiliar to him. Vincent DeLuca always moved with purpose. "I want to know every person she spoke to in the last 30 days. Every call, every text. Start with the phone records. Already pulling them." And Dario. He stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at the foyer. "She has a 2-month-old baby. She can't be far. She doesn't have resources I don't control." He said this with the certainty of a man who had constructed that fact deliberately and personally. "She has nowhere to go." Dario said nothing to this, which was appropriate. It was not a statement that required a response. It was simply the framing of an operation that was now underway. Vincent DeLuca walked downstairs, sat in his study, and began making calls. What he did not yet know, what he could not know, sitting in that study with the cold January light coming through the windows, was that Claire DeLuca had been planning this for 19 days, and that she had not done it alone. She had done it with help that even Dario Falcone, who knew almost everything worth knowing in Chicago, was not going to find quickly. But 19 days earlier, Claire had found the envelope. She had gone to the private mailbox herself because the housekeeper, a woman named Rosa, who came 3 times a week, had called in sick, and because one of the things Vincent had trained her to do, without framing it as training, was to check the mailbox on Rosa's sick days. It was one of the small practical responsibilities he had handed her, a gesture of inclusion that was actually a mechanism of routine, because routine, Claire had come to understand, was how Vincent controlled the parts of his life that did not require overt force. The mailbox was at the end of the private drive, inside a small stone alcove that the landscaping screened from the road. It was January, and she was wearing the heavy coat that made her look smaller than she was, and Emma was strapped to her chest in the carrier, asleep, because Emma slept better against a moving body than in the crib, and Claire had given up fighting that particular fact 3 weeks ago. She pulled the regular mail, 2 bills, a catalog, something from Vincent's accountant, and then, at the back of the box, a thick manila envelope with no return address. Her name on the front. Not Mrs. DeLuca. Not Claire DeLuca, just Claire, in handwriting she did not recognize. She stood at the mailbox for a moment, Emma's small weight against her sternum, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She should bring it inside. She should open it at the kitchen table the way she opened everything. She should wait. She opened it at the mailbox. Inside was a legal packet. 43 pages, paper-clipped and tabbed. A cover letter on the letterhead of Moss, Hartley and Associates, Richard Moss's firm, that was addressed to a probate judge whose name she did not recognize. She read the first paragraph standing in the cold with snow beginning to fall. Then she read it again. Then she turned to the attachments. It took her 25 minutes standing at that mailbox, Emma still asleep, the snow coming down harder now, to read enough to understand what the documents meant. The DeLuca family trust had been amended 6 weeks ago. Her name, which had been included as Vincent's spouse, had been removed. The replacement beneficiary was listed as Madeline A. Cross, with an address on North Michigan Avenue. She turned to the next tabbed section, a psychiatric evaluation. Not one she had attended, not one she remembered, conducted by a Dr. Franklin Bauer whose credentials she did not recognize, dated 3 weeks prior. The evaluation described a patient presenting with severe postpartum psychosis, delusional ideation, inability to care for an infant, risk of self-harm, and a documented history of erratic behavior and emotional instability. The patient was identified as Claire Marie DeLuca. She had never met Dr. Franklin Bauer. She had never been evaluated by Dr. Franklin Bauer. The final tabbed section was a draft petition for emergency sole custody of Emma Rose DeLuca, filed on behalf of Vincent Anthony DeLuca, citing his wife's psychiatric evaluation, her documented instability, and her demonstrated inability to provide a safe environment for the couple's minor child. Claire stood in the snow and looked at her daughter's name typed on a legal document she had never agreed to and felt something happen inside her chest. Not panic, not yet, because panic was a luxury that required a certain distance from danger, and she was not distant from this. She was inside it. What she felt was more like a door swinging shut. A sound she recognized from the delivery room when the monitors had started alarming and she had looked at the nurse's face and understood, from that face alone, that something had gone seriously wrong. She put the documents back in the envelope. She walked back to the house. She went upstairs, put Emma in the crib. Emma stirred but didn't wake, and sat on the edge of the bed with the envelope in her lap. She thought about what she knew. She knew Vincent had been pulling away from her incrementally since Emma was born. She had attributed this to his temperament, to the disruption of new fatherhood, to the fact that men like Vincent DeLuca were not designed for the particular chaos of infant life. She had not, until this moment, connected it to strategy. She thought about the things she had noticed and set aside. The phone call she had overheard in October through the study door, where Vincent had been speaking to someone she did not know about, the timeline. The way Richard Moss had looked at her at Thanksgiving, quickly and then away, as if she were something to be assessed and found acceptable for the moment. The appointment, she had been told, was a routine postpartum check that had been conducted by a doctor she had never seen before, who had asked her questions about her sleep patterns and her emotional state in a way that had felt, at the time, clinical, but had felt, in retrospect, like data collection. She sat on the bed for 40 minutes. Then she got up and went to Margaret Collins's house. Margaret lived in the small cottage at the edge of the DeLuca property, a remnant of the original estate that Vincent had kept because removing it would have required a zoning variance he didn't want to bother with. She was 78 years old, widowed, sharp as a wire, and she had been bringing Claire soup during the worst weeks of the postpartum period, slipping in through the back gate and leaving it on the kitchen counter without being asked. She was the only person on the property, or adjacent to it, who was not in Vincent's direct employ. Claire knocked on Margaret's back door with Emma against her chest and the envelope under her arm. Margaret opened it, looked at Claire's face, and said, "Come inside, it's cold." She sat Claire down at her kitchen table and listened without interrupting while Claire explained what was in the envelope. She listened the way very old women sometimes listen, without performance, without her face doing unnecessary things, just attending. When Claire finished, Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I heard him talking about a month ago, through the hedge when I was in my garden, him and another man." She paused. "The man said your name, said something about a doctor, about making it official before the end of January." Claire's hands were flat on the table. "You heard this, clear as I'm hearing you now. Did you recognize the other man?" "No, but he talked like a lawyer." Claire looked at the envelope. "There's a name, Richard Moss." Margaret nodded slowly, Then she got up, went to the small drawer beside her refrigerator, and came back with a business card. She placed it on the table between them. Claire picked it up. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Hawthorne Foundation. Private. A phone number. Nothing else. Someone left this for you, Margaret said. 3 weeks ago. A young man, well-dressed, said he was looking for you, said it was urgent, said if I saw you to make sure you got it. Who is Nathaniel Hawthorne? Claire said, though she recognized the name in the way you recognize a word in a language you used to speak, something stored in a part of memory that daily life doesn't often access. I don't know, Margaret said, but he seemed worried about you. Claire held the card and thought. Then it came back, 4 years ago, her last year as an ER nurse, before the gala, before Vincent, before any of this. A man brought in by ambulance, cardiac episode in a hotel lobby, VIP situation. The charge nurse had flagged it as someone who mattered before Claire even got to the bay. She had been working the resuscitation when he coded briefly, had been the one to call the intervention correctly when the attending had hesitated, had been present for the 17 minutes that had apparently made the difference between him surviving and not. He had sent flowers afterward. She had not seen him again. She looked at the card. She said, "Do you have a phone I can use?" Oh, she called from Margaret's landline. He picked up on the third ring, and she said her name, and there was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds, and then he said, "Claire, I've been trying to reach you." His voice was careful, not soft, not warm in the performative way. Careful, like someone choosing words with the knowledge that words could cause damage if placed incorrectly. She said, "How long have you been trying?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. Another pause. "I have a medical foundation. We review neonatal cases with irregular documentation. It's part of a quality assurance program we fund at 6 hospitals in the city. Your daughter's case came through our review flagged, laboratory discrepancies, treatment delay indicators." He stopped. "I need to be direct with you. Someone altered her medical records." Claire's hand tightened on the phone. "Claire, are you somewhere safe right now?" She looked at Margaret's kitchen, at the yellow curtains over the sink, at the small ceramic chickens on the shelf above the stove. "For the moment. Can you stay there? I can be at your location within the hour." "How do you know where I am?" "I don't. I'm asking you to tell me." She told him. She sat at Margaret's kitchen table while Emma made small sleeping sounds in the carrier against her chest, and she told Nathaniel Hawthorne the address of the cottage on the edge of the DeLuca estate, and she felt, as she said it, the enormity of what she was doing, the irreversibility of the act of asking for help, of extending trust across a space that had been deliberately engineered to be empty of anyone she could trust. Nathaniel arrived in 53 minutes. He came alone, in a black car, that was not a display of anything, just a car. And he stood at Margaret's back door and looked at Claire and the baby with an expression that was not pity and was not performance and was simply a recognition of the situation for what it was. "I'm going to tell you everything I know," he said, "and then you're going to decide what to do." "I've already decided," Claire said. He looked at her. "I'm leaving," she said. "I just need to know how." What followed, across 19 days, was the most disciplined, most careful, most frightening thing Claire DeLuca had ever done. And she had spent 3 years married to a man who considered fear a management tool. The plan was assembled in pieces, over short visits to Margaret's cottage, always during the hours when Vincent was at his office, always with Emma in the carrier, because Emma in the carrier meant no one questioned why Claire was taking a walk. Nathaniel's foundation had resources, legal resources, logistical resources, a small network of people who moved quietly through situations that required moving quietly. He did not do this professionally. He did it because, as he told her on the 3rd visit, sitting at Margaret's kitchen table with his hands around a mug of tea he had barely touched, "I came very close to dying in your emergency room. That creates an obligation that doesn't expire." She had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "That's not why you're doing this." He had not argued. She had accepted his help anyway. The morning of the departure, 6 days into January, Claire woke at 3:15 in the house that had never been a home and lay still for 4 minutes listening to Vincent's breathing. He was deeply asleep. He had come home late, a working dinner with someone from his organization. and he had gone straight to bed without acknowledging her beyond a brief nod. She had feigned sleep. She had been feigning a great deal for 19 days. She rose without sound. She had moved the items over a period of days, taking them to Margaret's cottage in ones and twos during her walks. Emma's clothes, her own essential documents which she had located and photographed, and then carefully returned to their original positions while keeping digital copies. The items from the safe which she had copied the combination for during a moment 18 months ago when Vincent had been briefly careless with it. She had not taken everything from the safe. She had taken the cash. She had taken the diamond bracelet that was listed in the trust documents as a DeLuca family asset. She had left the pearls because the pearls were hers, actually hers, given freely without calculation, and leaving them felt like the only uncorrupted gesture available to her. She dressed in the dark. She lifted Emma from the crib with the practiced efficiency of 2 months of nighttime care. Emma blinked, made a small sound, and Claire put her mouth close to the baby's ear and said, barely a breath, "I've got you. I've got you." Emma settled. She went downstairs. She walked through the house she had lived in for 3 years and did not look back at it with anything recognizable as grief. There was nothing here that was hers. There was the architecture of a life that had been built around her without her participation, and she was leaving the architecture standing because she had no use for it. She went out through the kitchen door, across the frozen garden, through the gap in the hedge that Margaret had identified months ago. A maintenance gap, left there for the landscaping crew, never locked, and into the small pocket of darkness between the property and the cottage. Margaret was awake. She was always awake early. She opened the door before Claire knocked and said nothing, just stepped aside to let her in. Nathaniel was already there, sitting at the table. He stood when she came in, and she saw in his face that he understood the specific weight of what she had just done, the crossing of a threshold that could not be uncrossed. "Everything is ready," he said. "Then let's go," she said. They were 40 minutes down the road, Emma asleep in the car seat that had been installed in Nathaniel's vehicle 2 days prior in a parking garage in Evanston, when Claire's old phone, the one she had left in the bedroom, plugged in to charge the way she always plugged it in, to buy time before anyone noticed the absence, received its first incoming call. It was Vincent. She knew because Nathaniel had set up a way for her to monitor it remotely. She watched the call come in on the small screen. She watched it go to voicemail. Then the second call. The third. She put the phone face down on her knee and looked out the window at the city passing, at the dark sky and the lit windows and the ordinary machinery of a world that had continued existing while she had been trapped inside someone else's architecture of control. Emma made a small sound in the seat beside her. Claire reached over without looking and placed her hand flat against the baby's chest. The heartbeat was steady, strong for how small she was. "She's good," Nathaniel said quietly, from the front seat. "I know," Claire said. She did not say anything else for a long time. Behind them, in the DeLuca mansion, the study lights were on, and Vincent DeLuca was on the phone with Dario Falcone, and he was discovering, one piece at a time, that his wife, the woman he had removed from a trust, labeled insane on a forged document, and planned to erase from her own daughter's life, had been several moves ahead of him for 19 days, and that she was now gone into a city of 2.5 million people, and that she had not gone alone. Dario's voice came through the phone, flat and precise. The camera on the north side of the property was offline from 3:18 to 4:42, not a malfunction. Someone cut the feed remotely. Vincent said nothing. "There's a vehicle on the traffic camera at Sheridan and Elm at 4:51, black, partial plate, not registered to anyone in her contact list." A pause. "Someone helped her, someone with resources." Vincent looked at the open safe, at the pearl necklace lying on the velvet shelf. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time, then he set it back down. "I want every resource we have on this," he said. "Every contact in the department, every PI on retainer, every favor we're owed." His voice was quiet, not loud, the kind of quiet that in his organization everyone had learned to be more afraid of than shouting. "I want my daughter back." He did not say, "I want my wife back." He said, "I want my daughter back." Because Claire, he had already decided, was going to regret this in ways she could not yet imagine. Dario was already making calls, and somewhere in Chicago, Heading toward a safe house in a neighborhood where no one knew the name DeLuca, Claire held her daughter's heartbeat under her palm and did not look back and thought about nothing except the next hour, and the hour after that, and the long, difficult, necessary work of staying ahead of the man who had built a world specifically designed to make that impossible. Her phone, Nathaniel's spare, a clean number, no history, buzzed once. She looked at the screen, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "He knows you're gone. Be careful." She stared at it. Then, a second text from the same number. "My name is Lucas Bennett. I was your paramedic when they transported you to Northwestern 8 months ago. I've been looking at your hospital records. We need to talk. There's something wrong with what they did to you in that hospital. Something very wrong." Claire looked at the message for a long time. Then she looked at Nathaniel's reflection in the rearview mirror. "Someone else found us," she said. He met her eyes in the mirror. "Who?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. Outside the window, Chicago was fully awake now, the sky lightening behind the buildings, the streets filling with ordinary people going to ordinary places. None of them aware that somewhere in the city, a woman with a 2-month-old daughter was reading a text message that suggested the nightmare she had just escaped was deeper and darker and far more deliberately constructed than even she had understood. The safe house was a second-floor apartment above a dry cleaning business on the northwest side of the city, in a neighborhood where the storefronts changed languages every 3 blocks, and nobody looked twice at a car they didn't recognize. Nathaniel had arranged it through the foundation's legal counsel, a woman named Patricia Vance, who handled sensitive relocations for domestic violence cases and who had asked no questions beyond what she needed to answer the operational ones. The apartment had 2 rooms, a bathroom with a shower that took 4 minutes to produce hot water, and a kitchen stocked with enough to last a week. The windows faced an alley. The building entrance was on a side street. It was 6:40 in the morning when they arrived. Claire carried Emma up the stairs while Nathaniel brought the bags, and she stood in the center of the small living room and felt the particular silence of a space that had never held her life. No accumulated weight of memory, no furniture arranged to someone else's preference. No photograph on a wall that she'd had no part in choosing. Just 4 walls and the smell of old wood, and faintly the chemicals from the dry cleaner below. She sat down on the edge of the couch with Emma in her arms and did not cry. She had been not crying for 19 days, and she was good at it by now. Nathaniel set the bags down and stood near the door. He was not the kind of man who filled space unnecessarily, which she had noticed and appreciated. He was 40 years old, lean in the way of someone who moved regularly and deliberately, and he had a quality of stillness that she found, at this particular moment, either reassuring or unbearable depending on the second. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't sleep." "Claire, I got a text from someone named Lucas Bennett." She had been holding the phone in her free hand since the car. She held it up now. "He says he was a paramedic on my transport to Northwestern, 8 months ago." Nathaniel crossed the room and looked at the screen without taking the phone from her. His jaw moved slightly. "Do you remember him?" "I remember being in an ambulance. I remember being in a lot of pain and being very scared. I don't remember faces." She looked at the message again. Something wrong with what they did to you in that hospital. "How does he have this number?" "He doesn't." Nathaniel straightened. "He has the number of the clean phone I gave you. That number is not connected to you in any database. The only people who have it are me, Patricia Vance, and Margaret." He paused. "Margaret." "She wouldn't." "No, she wouldn't." He thought for a moment. "Patricia may have given it to someone she trusts in the network. It happens. She moves a lot of cases." He didn't sound alarmed. He sounded like a man categorizing a problem. "I'll call her. Later." Claire looked at the message. "He says he's been looking at my hospital records. He says there's something wrong." She looked up at Nathaniel. "You told me there were laboratory discrepancies. You told me someone altered Emma's neonatal records. How long have you known?" A pause. "Not long, but present." 6 weeks, he said. She looked at him. "I was trying to reach you before I had the full picture," he said. "I didn't want to contact you with incomplete information. I was trying to be careful." "You were trying to be careful," she said, "while I was living in that house." "Yes." The word landed. She let it. "What else haven't you told me because you were trying to be careful?" He sat down in the chair across from her. He put his forearms on his knees and looked at her directly, without deflection. which she had come to understand was the particular quality that made her trust him in the first place. He did not manage her. He gave her the information and let her carry it. The laboratory alterations weren't random, he said. They were targeted. Specific markers in Emma's blood panel were suppressed in the records that went to the treating physicians. It wasn't a clerical error, and it wasn't a system glitch. Someone with access to the records management system made deliberate changes on 3 separate dates. He paused. Those dates correspond to the days when your treating physician, Dr. Anand Patel, would have reviewed Emma's case for discharge readiness. Claire was very still. They kept her in the NICU longer. They kept her in the NICU longer than her actual condition required. 3 extra weeks, possibly 4. He held her gaze. And during those weeks, you were alone in that house, she said, recovering, barely functional. She thought about those weeks. The particular fog of early postpartum, combined with a traumatic birth, combined with the terror of a baby in the NICU, combined with a husband who came and went and looked at her like she was a logistical problem to be managed. He wanted me isolated. He wanted me to look unstable. He needed time for the documentation. Yes. The psychiatric evaluation, the forged one. Yes. She looked down at Emma, who was awake now, her small face working through the expressions infants make that don't yet correspond to anything interpretable. Dark eyes, dark hair. Vincent's coloring, which was a fact Claire had simply absorbed and set aside as something she did not have the energy to feel about right now. Text him back, Nathaniel said. She looked up. Lucas Bennett. Text him back. If he has information about the hospital records, we need it. Patricia's network vets the people who come through it. If she gave him the number, she had a reason. He paused. But don't tell him where we are. Not yet. Claire typed, How did you get this number? The response came in under a minute. Patricia Vance. She said you needed someone who could speak to what happened medically. I can do that. I've been building this file for 4 months. I need to meet you. She showed Nathaniel the screen. He read it. 4 months, he said. He started before you did. He started before I did, Nathaniel agreed, and something in his voice was not quite comfortable with that fact. Lucas Bennett arrived at the safe house at 9:15 that morning. He was 34, medium height, the kind of build that suggested a physical job done for a long time, and he had the specific alertness of someone who had not slept properly in a while. Dark circles, eyes moving to the door when he entered before they moved to the people in the room. He was carrying a messenger bag that was clearly heavy. He looked at Claire first, then at Emma, then at Nathaniel. You're Hawthorne, he said. Yes. I know who you are. Not hostile, assessing. I know what the Foundation does. I've been following the neonatal review program. He looked back at Claire. You probably don't remember me. I remember the ambulance, she said. I don't remember your face. You were in bad shape. He said it without apology or softening. You were hemorrhaging. You coded briefly in the rig. He set the bag down on the kitchen table and unzipped it. I was the one who radioed ahead. I was the one who told Northwestern what they were receiving. He stopped with his hands in the bag. 2 weeks later, I went back to check the transport records. I do that sometimes. Follow up on the bad ones, and I found a discrepancy between what I called in and what was documented in the receiving hospital's intake record. What kind of discrepancy? Nathaniel said. The kind where I said she presented with acute hemorrhage, possible placental abruption, blood pressure at 70/40, and the intake record says stable presentation, borderline blood pressure, no acute hemorrhage indicators. He pulled a folder from the bag and set it on the table. Those aren't the same patient. Those are 2 different patients. Claire looked at the folder. She did not reach for it. I went to my supervisor, Lucas said. He told me the records were correct and I was misremembering. I went to the hospital's records coordinator. Same answer. I filed a formal discrepancy report with the state medical board. He paused. 3 weeks later, I was suspended from my paramedic certification for alleged falsification of transport records. Pending investigation. The room was quiet. They came after you, Claire said. They came after me. He said it flat. No performance of outrage, just the fact. I've been building the file since then. I've got my original radio transcript. I pulled it before they could. I've got testimony from my partner that night, a woman named Sheila Greer, who confirms what I called in. I've got 3 other cases from Northwestern over the past 2 years with similar intake discrepancies, all involving patients connected in some way to DeLuca-affiliated medical supply contracts. He looked at her. Your husband's organization has a financial relationship with Northwestern's records management vendor. I traced it through 4 shell companies, but it's there. Nathaniel had gone very still. In the way he went still when he was computing something. Lucas looked at him. Your foundation found the neonatal record alterations. Yes. Do you have the chain of access? Who made the changes? We have the system logs. We haven't identified the individual yet. I have a name, Lucas said. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it. How? I spent 4 months on this. His voice had an edge now. I lost my career on this. I have a name. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet and placed it face up on the table. A name, a title, a department at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Claire read it. She did not know the name. Nathaniel did. She could tell because his face went somewhere briefly and then came back. You know him, she said. He sits on a board, an oversight committee for a medical nonprofit. He paused. A nonprofit that receives partial funding from one of the DeLuca real estate holding companies. So he's bought, Lucas said. He's compromised, Nathaniel said, which is not always the same thing, but in this case is probably close enough. Lucas looked between them. How long have the 2 of you been working on this? We started coordinating 3 weeks ago, Nathaniel said. I've been on it for 4 months. There was something in his voice now. Not anger exactly, more like the particular frustration of someone who has been carrying weight alone and has just now discovered that other people knew about the weight and said nothing. She was in that house for 4 months after I started finding this. She was in that house with a man who forged psychiatric records and tampered with her newborn's medical files. And you, he looked at Nathaniel, had resources that could have gotten her out faster. I needed to confirm. You needed to confirm, Lucas said. Right, and she needed to survive. The air in the room changed. Claire said, Stop. Both men looked at her. I'm here, she said. Emma's here. We're out. Her voice was even. She had not raised it. Whatever the argument about the timeline is, we can have it later. Right now I need to know what we're walking into. She looked at Lucas. If Vincent knows I'm gone, and he knows, what does his response look like? How fast does he move? Lucas sat down. He pulled the folder back toward himself, flipping to a section near the back. Based on what I've documented about his organization's response patterns in other situations, and I've been tracking this as part of the file, he moves within hours. He has contacts in CPD, at least 4 detectives that I've identified who have received payments through the shell structure. He'll file a missing person report or a custodial concern report, which puts official resources behind his search. He'll use his PI network. I've identified a firm called Brennan Associates that does most of his investigative work, and he'll put his own people in the streets, which is faster than all of it. How does he find someone who doesn't want to be found? He looks at everyone she's ever known, Lucas said. Every contact, every connection. He starts with the phone records, which he controls since your phone is on his account, and he works outward. He traces relationships. He offers money where money works and applies pressure where it doesn't. A pause. He's going to find Margaret Collins. Claire's stomach moved. She helped us, Claire said. He knows that, or he'll figure it out. The camera gap, the timing, it points to someone on the property. Margaret Collins is the only person on that property who isn't his employee. Lucas closed the folder. She's 78 years old, and she's in that cottage right now. Claire was already reaching for the phone. Nathaniel put his hand on her wrist, not restraining, stopping. If you call her on the clean phone, you create a record of contact between you and the property. If his people are already monitoring communications from that address, I'm not leaving her there, Claire said. I'm not saying leave her there. I'm saying don't call her on this phone. He took his hand away. I'll have Patricia make contact, landline to landline. Patricia has a protocol for this. How long will that take? 20 minutes. Claire looked at him. He picked up his phone and walked to the other room. She heard him speaking quietly, calmly, with the controlled efficiency of a man who had resources and knew how to direct them. Lucas was watching her. He controls everything, she said. Not a question, not helplessness, just the naming of a fact. He controls a lot, Lucas said. He doesn't control the federal level. He paused. The file I've built, the corporate connections, the shell structure, the hospital records tampering. It's not just a custody case. This is RICO-adjacent material, medical fraud, witness intimidation. Once I was suspended, they crossed a line that goes beyond the domestic situation. You want to go to the FBI? I want us to go to the FBI. You, me, and whatever Hawthorne's Foundation has documented. Together, the three of us have something individually none of us has alone. He looked at her steadily. But it has to be soon. The longer we wait, the more time he has to bury things. And the more time he has to find us, she said. Yes. Nathaniel came back from the other room. Patricia's calling Margaret. She'll arrange for Margaret to be moved to Patricia's secondary location by this afternoon. He sat down. Margaret is safe for the next few hours. Claire let out a breath she had been holding in her chest like a stone. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. A call. Not a text. From the clean number, but the one she was using, but the incoming display showed a blocked ID. She looked at Nathaniel. Don't answer it, he said. It rang 4 times and stopped. 30 seconds later, a text from the same blocked number. I know where you are. 2nd floor, above the dry cleaner. You have 20 minutes before Brennan Associates has the address. I'm not DeLuca. I'm trying to help you. Come to the back door. All 3 of them looked at the screen. Lucas was on his feet. How? I don't know, Nathaniel said. And it was the first time since Claire had met him that he sounded like something had outpaced him. Claire stood up. She put Emma against her shoulder and she walked to the window that faced the alley and looked down without touching the glass, staying to the side. And in the alley below there was a figure standing at the base of the fire escape. A man. Alone. Hands visible. He was not looking up. He was looking at the entrance to the alley with his back partially toward the building, which was either the posture of someone genuinely watching for a threat or the posture of someone performing the appearance of watching for a threat. She could not tell which. 20 minutes, she said. He could be Brennan. He could be DeLuca's, Lucas said. He could be, she said. Claire, Nathaniel said. She looked at the man in the alley. He had not moved. The alley was empty except for him and the garbage containers and the thin January light coming in from the street end. If he's lying about who he is, she said, then we have less than 20 minutes anyway. She turned from the window and looked at both of them. And if he's telling the truth, we have less than 20 minutes anyway. She picked up the bag she had packed in the dark at 3 a.m. Diapers, formula, 2 changes of clothes for Emma, 1 change for herself, the legal documents, Lucas's folder, the cash from the safe. So we move. Lucas grabbed his bag without being asked. Nathaniel was already at the door. Claire went out of the apartment and down the stairs with Emma against her chest, and the weight of everything they had built in 19 days and everything they had just learned in the last 3 hours compressed into the simple mechanical act of putting one foot in front of the other on a staircase that smelled like dry cleaning chemicals and old wood. The figure in the alley heard the back door open and turned around. He was young, late 20s. He had the kind of face that had not yet fully settled into itself, and he was wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for the weather, which was the detail that made Claire, irrationally and immediately, think he was probably telling the truth about not being Brennan Associates. Brennan Associates people wore good coats. My name is Danny Reyes, he said. I'm a junior associate at Moss Hartley. Richard Moss is my boss. He looked at Claire. I'm the one who put that envelope in your mailbox. The alley was very quiet. You work for Vincent's attorney, Lucas said. I work for the firm that works for Vincent, Danny said. I process documents. I file things. I have access to everything. His voice was shaking slightly, not with deception, but with the specific frequency of someone who had frightened himself with what he'd decided to do. I put that envelope in your mailbox because I have a daughter. She's 9 months old. He stopped. He looked at Emma. I read those custody documents, and I have a 9-month-old daughter, and He stopped again. Brennan Associates has this address. They picked up the vehicle on a camera network that DeLuca's people monitor. They filed it 40 minutes ago. They're on their way. How long? Nathaniel said. 15 minutes. Maybe less. Nathaniel looked at Claire. She looked back at him. In the 3 weeks they had been planning this, she had learned to read the specific quality of his assessments, when he was uncertain, when he was calculating, when he had arrived at a conclusion and was deciding how to present it. He had arrived at a conclusion. "The warehouse on Kedzie," he said. "Patricia's fallback. 4 people and an infant in 1 vehicle is visible," Lucas said. "2 vehicles," Nathaniel said. "You take Claire and Emma. I take Danny. Different routes. We converge at Kedzie in 45 minutes. He looked at Danny Reyes. "What else do you have from Moss's files?" Danny reached inside his coat and pulled out a thumb drive. "Everything," he said. "Every document connected to the DeLuca custody case, the trust amendment, the psychiatric evaluation, the names of the doctors, the payment records for Dr. Bauer, the communications between Moss and DeLuca about the timeline." He held it out. "Everything." Nathaniel took it. He looked at it for 1 second in his palm. Then he put it in his inside coat pocket and buttoned the coat. 45 minutes, he said. "Kedzie." Lucas was already moving toward the alley exit, scanning the street, his body carrying the particular readiness of someone who had trained for emergencies, even if this specific emergency had not been in any training manual he'd ever seen. Claire followed him with Emma against her chest, and she did not look back at the apartment above the dry cleaner, at the 4 walls that had held them for 3 hours. At the small temporary shelter they were leaving behind now, the way she seemed to be leaving everything behind. In pieces, fast, without the luxury of grief. They were on the street and moving toward Lucas's car when her clean phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number she recognized. Margaret. She answered without stopping, her feet still moving on the sidewalk, the cold hitting her face like a warning. "Claire," Margaret's voice, tight, wrong. "Margaret, Patricia is going to call you." "There's a man at my door," Margaret said. "He's been knocking for 10 minutes. He's not going away." Her voice was steady in the way that very certain people are steady when they are frightened. "He says he's from the city." Something about the property. "But Claire." A pause. "He's been on his phone since he arrived. He's not looking at the property. He's looking at the road." "Get away from the door," Claire said. "Go to your back room. Don't open it. Patricia is going to call you in the next 10 minutes. Claire, you're going to be fine. Don't open the door." She ended the call. Lucas had the car unlocked. She got in the back with Emma and the bag, and Lucas got in the front and started the engine in one motion and pulled out without asking which direction, because Nathaniel had already given him the address. Emma made a small sound against her chest. "I know," Claire said quietly. To herself, to the baby, to no one. "I know." Lucas drove. The city moved past the windows. Claire watched the mirrors. 4 blocks away from the dry cleaner, a black SUV turned onto the street they had just left and stopped in front of the building. She watched it in the side mirror until it was out of sight. 15 minutes, Danny had said. It had been 12. They were ahead of it by 3 minutes, and a decision made in an alley based on an instinct about the temperature of a man's coat, which was not the kind of margin that Claire DeLuca had ever in her life imagined she would be operating on. But she was operating on it, and the car was moving. And Emma's heartbeat was steady under Claire's palm, and the car was moving, and Lucas was driving, and that was all there was for 4 minutes. Just motion and the city and the sound of the heater and the particular silence of 3 people who had just outrun something by a margin that none of them were ready to calculate out loud. Then Lucas said, "Kedzie in 20 minutes. Nathaniel's route is longer. He'll be there after us." "Danny Reyes," Claire said. "Do you know him?" "Never heard of him before today." "He put the envelope in my mailbox." "I heard." Lucas checked the mirror, then checked it again. "A junior associate at Moss's firm who has access to everything and decided to burn it because he has a baby daughter." He paused. "That's either exactly what it looks like, or it's the most effective approach anyone's thought of." "You think he's planted. I think Vincent DeLuca has been 3 steps ahead of you for months, and then suddenly he's not. He changed lanes, not fast, just smoothly, the way someone drives when they are navigating rather than fleeing. I think it's worth asking why." Claire looked out the window. The northwest side moved past. Tire shops, laundromats, a Mexican bakery with the lights just coming on inside. The ordinary city doing its ordinary morning. He had the address already. Brennan Associates had it without Danny telling them. Right. So if Danny was planted, His job wasn't to lead them to us. They already had us. She thought it through. His job would be something else. The thumb drive, Lucas said. She looked at the back of his head. He hands Nathaniel a thumb drive with everything on it, Lucas said. We trust the thumb drive because it came from inside Moss's firm, and it confirms everything we already suspected. We build our case on it. We go to the FBI with it. He stopped. And it's either clean and everything's fine, or it's not clean, and we've handed the opposition a window into exactly what we're going to tell federal investigators. The car was quiet except for the heater. We need to tell Nathaniel, Claire said. I've been thinking about how to do that without putting it in a text, Lucas said. 40 minutes. We'll be at Kedzie. She looked down at Emma, who was awake and working her mouth in the small, serious way of an infant with opinions about hunger. Claire shifted her in the carrier, made the adjustment, felt Emma settle. The normalcy of the gesture, so the animal simplicity of a mother adjusting her child, inside the specific insanity of the morning felt like something she could not name and did not try to. She thought about the thumb drive. She thought about Danny Reyes standing in the alley with his jacket that wasn't warm enough, his voice shaking with what she had read as genuine fear, his face doing the thing faces do when a person has frightened themselves with their own decision. She thought about the 9-month-old daughter he had mentioned. She thought about the way he had looked at Emma. She thought, I could be wrong about him. She thought, I could also be wrong about being wrong about him. Both thoughts sat in her chest with equal weight, and she could not resolve them, and she filed them and looked back at the mirrors. The warehouse on Kedzie was not a warehouse anymore in any operational sense. It was a building that had been a warehouse 20 years ago and was now owned by a nonprofit that used the ground floor for food distribution twice a week and left the upper 2 floors empty and accessible to Patricia Vance's network for exactly these kinds of situations. Patricia had 4 locations like this in the city. She rotated them. She kept no written list of which one was assigned to which case. Lucas parked in the lot behind the building, and they went in through a side entrance with a keypad code Nathaniel had given them. The ground floor smelled like cardboard, and the specific dusty warmth of a large heated space. Metal shelving, folded tables stacked against the wall, the kind of room that suggested organized effort and a limited budget. They went upstairs. The upper floor was open, largely empty, with high windows that let in the flat January light. A folding table, several chairs. A space heater in the corner that Lucas turned on immediately. Claire sat down and arranged Emma and the baby latched, and the simple biology of that. The fact that her body still worked, still produced what the child needed, even inside all of this, felt like the most concrete thing in the world. Lucas stood at the window and watched the lot below. They waited. Nathaniel and Danny arrived 11 minutes later. She watched Nathaniel's face when he came through the door, and she saw in it the controlled residue of something that had not been controlled. He had moved fast, she could tell, faster than the deliberate pace she associated with him, and there was a quality in the set of his shoulders that was not his usual quality. We may have a problem with the drive, Lucas said, before Nathaniel had fully cleared the doorway. Nathaniel stopped. Explain. Lucas explained, concisely, without editorializing. Just the logic, the sequence, the question at the end of it. Danny Reyes stood near the door and listened, and his face went through something. Not guilt, she thought, watching him carefully, but something more complicated. Something that looked like a person hearing a version of their own story that they hadn't considered and finding that it fit. When Lucas finished, Nathaniel looked at Danny. Danny said, "He's right to ask." Nathaniel's expression didn't move. I'm not... Danny stopped. Restarted. I'm not planted. But he's right that the drive is a question. He reached into his coat, the same gesture as the alley, and for 1 second Claire felt something tighten in her chest. But he brought out a phone. Every document on that drive I also photographed with my personal phone over the last 3 weeks. Independent copies. If the drive has been tampered with, and I don't know that it has, I put it together myself. But I don't know what Moss's IT people may have done to the system. The photographs are a parallel record. He held the phone out toward Nathaniel. Check them against the drive. If the documents match, the drive is what I said it is. If they don't match, you know the drive was altered after I compiled it and you know something about how deep Moss's operation goes. Nathaniel took the phone. He looked at Danny for a moment. How old is your daughter? 9 months, Danny said. Her name is Rosa. Nathaniel nodded once. He put the phone in his pocket with the drive and went to the folding table and sat down and opened his laptop and began the comparison. The room was quiet except for the space heater. Lucas sat across from Claire. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the morning, the kind of tired that accumulates over months of carrying something alone. His suspension, his file, 4 months of building a case that no one official would touch, because the official world in certain Chicago precincts was not a neutral party. You've been doing this since August, she said quietly. August, yeah. He rubbed the back of his neck. My partner Sheila, she kept telling me to let it go. Said I was going to blow up my career over something I couldn't prove. He looked at his hands. She wasn't wrong about the career part. What made you keep going? He was quiet for a moment. I've run maybe 400 transports in 7 years. You remember the ones that go wrong. You remember the faces. He glanced at Emma without making it a gesture. She was 2 months old when I was in that ambulance with you. Emma, premature, all wired up. You kept asking if she was okay and you were losing blood and asking about her. He stopped. And then 2 weeks later, the record said you weren't even really sick. He shook his head. That kind of lie has weight. It has a specific weight, and I couldn't put it down. Claire held that for a moment. Then Nathaniel said from the table, The documents match. Everyone looked at him. The drive is clean. The photographs match the drive contents exactly. He paused. Danny, these payment records for Dr. Bauer, the forged psychiatric evaluation, these show disbursements from a DeLuca holding company through a medical consulting LLC. This is traceable. This is federal-level evidence. Danny nodded. I know. That's why I took it. There's something else on here. Nathaniel's voice had changed slightly. Not much. Enough. He was leaning closer to the screen. A communication thread between Moss and someone identified only as contact R7. He was reading. His jaw moved. This is from 6 weeks ago. He read in silence for a moment. They're not just planning to take Emma. He looked up. They're planning to relocate her, he said, out of Illinois. Moss has a contact, a judge in a private family court in a jurisdiction without extradition complications with Illinois. The plan was to have the emergency custody order issued here, then immediately transfer Emma to a secondary custody arrangement out of state before you could mount a legal response. He paused. Once Emma crossed state lines under a valid custody order, getting her back would take months, maybe years. The warehouse was very quiet. Claire felt the words enter her body the way cold water enters a body, all at once, reaching every part. He was never going to fight me for custody here, she said. No. He was going to take her and move her before I had time to respond. Yes. And the psychiatric evaluation was to establish in the record that you were unstable and potentially dangerous. Any emergency motion you filed would be evaluated against that record. It would slow everything down. He closed the laptop. He had 18 days left on the timeline before the end of January. She had gotten out with 19 days to spare. 18 days. 1 day of margin. She looked down at Emma. Emma looked back at her with the dark, unreadable focus of an infant who does not yet know what looking means, but does it with complete attention. Claire thought about Emma in some other state, in some other arrangement, growing up with the name DeLuca as the only frame she had for who she was and where she came from. She thought about what she would have become. The woman in the forged psychiatric evaluation, the unstable mother, the woman who had lost her child because she had not been well enough to keep her. She thought about the pearls she had left in the safe. Something inside her. Something she did not have a name for. Something that had been keeping itself quiet and managed through 19 days of planning and 3 hours of running, went very still. Not calm. Not resolved. Still in the way a thing is still when it has finished moving in one direction and has not yet started moving in another. We go to the FBI, she said. Yes, Nathaniel said. Today. Today, he agreed. I have a contact in the Chicago field office, a supervisory agent named Carver. He's been tracking DeLuca's organization for 3 years. He's legitimate, I had him vetted independently. He paused. With what we have, the drive, Lucas's file, Danny's testimony, the Foundation's documentation, he'll have enough to open a formal investigation. Enough to apply for a protective order that supersedes any state custody action Vincent files. How long to set the meeting? I can have it this afternoon. Lucas stood up from his chair. He went to his bag and pulled out the thick folder and set it on the table. Everything I have goes with the drive. Danny looked at the folder. What's in there? 4 months of your employer's dirty laundry, Lucas said. Corporate structure, shell companies, hospital payment records, my transport documentation, Sheila's statement. He looked at Danny. And you. Danny nodded. He did not look away from the folder. Nathaniel was already on his phone, moving toward the far end of the warehouse, speaking quietly. Claire watched him and thought about the 19 days, and about the way plans look solid until they move, and about the 3 minutes of margin between them and the black SUV on the street outside the dry cleaner. Her clean phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. A text from Margaret's landline, which meant Patricia had gotten Margaret to a location with a Patricia-controlled phone. But the text was not from Patricia. It was 4 words in Margaret's precise, elderly handwriting rendered in text. They took the recordings. Claire stared at the screen. She called the number. Margaret answered on the first ring. Her voice was steady in the way it had been steady in the cottage, the particular steadiness of a woman who had lived long enough to know that falling apart was a luxury with a cost she wasn't willing to pay. They came to the cottage, Margaret said. After the man at the door, 2 of them. They had a document, a warrant or something that looked like one. They went through the cottage. A pause. The recordings, Claire. I had them on a voice recorder in the kitchen drawer. They found them. Claire felt the floor shift. The recordings. Margaret's secret recordings of Vincent discussing the plan. The forged psychiatric records. The manipulation of the courts. The timeline for taking Emma. The recordings that had been, from the beginning, the most direct evidence they had. Undeniable, in Vincent's own voice, time-stamped and clear. Gone. Did you give Patricia the recorder? She said. Did you make copies? I didn't know to make copies, Margaret said. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Don't apologize, Claire said. Are you safe right now? I'm somewhere safe. Patricia's people brought me here. A pause. Claire, the man from the door. Before he left, he said something. He was on his phone and he said it to whoever he was talking to, not to me. He thought I couldn't hear. Another pause. He said, Moss has a motion ready to file. Once we have proof she left voluntarily with the child, the judge signs tonight. Claire said, Tonight. Tonight, Margaret confirmed. She ended the call. She looked up. Lucas was watching her. Danny was watching her. Nathaniel was still on his phone at the far end of the warehouse, and she looked at him, and something in her face must have communicated the specific gravity of what she had just heard, because he said something brief to whoever he was speaking to and ended the call and walked back toward her. The recordings are gone, she said. Vincent's people took them from Margaret's cottage. Nathaniel absorbed this. The drive still has payment records, corporate structure, circumstantial chains. She looked at him. Not a voice recording of Vincent DeLuca describing exactly what he was going to do. Those are not the same thing. No, he said. They're not. And Moss is filing a custody motion tonight. If he gets an emergency order signed before we get to Carver, he won't, Nathaniel said. I'll have Carver by 4 o'clock. An emergency protective order from the federal level supersedes. And if you don't, she said, if something goes wrong between now and 4 o'clock, if Brennan Associates finds this location, if one of Vincent's people in CPD flags your car, if... She stopped herself. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum for a moment, where the tension was sitting like a fist. Without the recordings, the federal case is slower. It's buildable, but it's slower. It gives Vincent's attorneys time to challenge, to delay, to move things through the state court faster than we can respond federally. Then we need the recordings, Lucas said. Everyone looked at him. They were taken from the cottage, he said. Where do Vincent's people take things they collect? Where does Brennan Associates bring their materials? Danny said, there's a law office. Not Moss's main office, a secondary location, a suite in the Loop that the firm uses for sensitive case materials. I've been there twice. Everything sensitive gets couriered there and locked in their evidence room. He paused. That's where the recordings are. The room was very quiet. We can't go into a law office and take them back, Lucas said, and from his tone it was clear he was saying it in order to hear someone argue with it, rather than because he believed it settled anything. No, Nathaniel said. Silence. Then Danny said, I have a key card. He said it the way a person says something they have been deciding whether to say. For the secondary office, I use it for late-night filings. It's still active. They haven't revoked my access because as far as Moss knows, I'm still working my regular hours. He doesn't know I took the documents yet. He doesn't know I talked to you. Everyone in the room recalibrated. If they find out you've flipped, Lucas said, they revoke the card. Yes. So it has to be now, today, before Moss's office realizes. Yes, Danny said again. Claire looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at the floor for a moment, then up. This is not what I planned, he said. No, she said, it's not. If Danny goes into that office and removes materials from an active case file, he's committed a crime regardless of whether the materials are evidence of a greater crime. It complicates everything. It creates a vulnerability in our case that Vincent's attorneys will attack. And if we don't have the recordings, Claire said, we walk into the FBI today with a chain of financial documentation and a forged psychiatric evaluation and testimony from a suspended paramedic and a junior attorney who broke privilege. She looked at him directly. Which case do you think Richard Moss is more afraid of? Nathaniel said nothing. The recordings, she said, in Vincent's own voice. That's the case he's afraid of. That's why he sent people to Margaret's cottage the moment he knew I was gone. Not the money trail, the voice. The space heater ticked. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. A truck on Kedzie, someone's horn 2 blocks over, a dog somewhere. Nathaniel looked at Danny. How long to get in and out of the secondary office? 30 minutes if nothing goes wrong. Define nothing goes wrong. Keycard works. Materials are in the evidence room where they always are. No one from the firm is there on a Thursday morning. He paused. It's a reasonable assumption. Moss is at the main office on Thursdays. His partners don't use the secondary space except for client meetings. I'll go with you, Lucas said. You can't, Danny said. If someone sees me, I have an excuse. If someone sees you, there's no version of that conversation that ends well. Then I'll wait outside. Lucas, Nathaniel said. I'm not sending him in alone, Lucas said. It was not negotiable in his voice. It was just a fact, stated in the tone of someone who had made a decision and was simply informing the room of it. Nathaniel looked at him for a moment, then at Claire. She was looking at Emma. Emma had fallen asleep against her chest with the absolute boneless trust of an infant who has no framework for danger, who knows nothing except the warmth and the heartbeat and the smell of the person who has not put her down since 3 a.m. Claire thought about 18 days. She thought about the judge whose name she didn't know in the jurisdiction without extradition complications. She thought about Vincent's voice on a recording describing calmly and specifically the plan to take her daughter. She looked up. Go, she said to Danny. Both of you. She looked at Lucas. 30 minutes, and then we go directly to the FBI field office. Not here. Not another safe house. Directly there. Lucas nodded. Danny zipped his coat. They went down the stairs and out the side entrance, and Claire heard the car start in the lot below, and she did not go to the window because she did not want to watch them drive away, because watching them drive away would activate the part of her that understood how many things could go wrong in a law office in the Loop on a Thursday morning, and that part of her needed to stay quiet for the next 30 minutes, or she was going to stop functioning. She looked at Nathaniel. He was standing at the table with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on the wall, which was how she had come to recognize that he was doing the internal equivalent of what she was doing, keeping the catastrophic scenarios at sufficient distance to stay operational. The FBI contact, she said. Carver. I'll confirm the meeting. If Danny and Lucas aren't back in 45 minutes, we go anyway, he said. With what we have. Right. She sat down. Emma breathed against her chest. The space heater ticked. 23 minutes later, Lucas's name appeared on her phone screen. She answered immediately. His voice was wrong, tight in a way it had not been in the car, in the warehouse, in any of the preceding hours. "We have a problem," he said. She stood up. "We're in the secondary office," he said. "We found the evidence room. We found the recorder." A pause. "Claire, there's something else in here, in the file labeled with your name." She could hear him breathing. She could hear the specific quality of a person who has just seen something and cannot immediately organize it into language. "There's a second psychiatric evaluation, not Bowers, an earlier one." Another pause. "From 18 months ago, before Emma, before the pregnancy." Saw. His voice dropped. "It's real. It has Northwestern's letterhead. It has a signature from a doctor I recognized, a legitimate psychiatrist on Northwestern staff." He stopped. "It says you were treated voluntarily for severe anxiety and emotional dysregulation 18 months ago. 6 sessions. Discharged as stable." The warehouse was absolutely silent around Claire. Vincent's attorneys attached a cover memo. They're going to argue that the postpartum evaluation wasn't fabricated from nothing, that they were documenting a continuation of a pre-existing condition. His voice was careful now, the way voices are careful when they are delivering something they know will cause damage. "Claire, did you see a psychiatrist at Northwestern 18 months ago?" She stood in the warehouse with Emma asleep against her chest and the space heater ticking and Nathaniel watching her face from across the room, and she said, "Yes." The word came out without hesitation and without apology, and she heard Lucas go very still on the other end of the phone. "Yes," she said again. 18 months ago. I went voluntarily, 6 sessions. I was having panic attacks. I had just moved into that house. I had just stopped working. I was losing the shape of who I was, and I didn't have language for it yet. I went to get help." Her voice was level. "I was discharged stable because I was stable. That was a real evaluation by a real doctor, and I was honest in every single session." Lucas said, "Okay, it's not a secret. I'm not ashamed of it." She paused. But Vincent knew. He knew. He knew because he monitors everything. He would have seen the insurance claim. He would have seen the appointment on the calendar. She thought about it for one cold second. He's been holding it for 18 months, waiting for the moment it would be most useful. Nathaniel was in front of her now, close, his face asking the question his mouth hadn't formed yet. "He has a real evaluation," she said to Nathaniel. 18 months old, voluntary treatment for anxiety. He's going to use it to legitimate the forged one, argue it's a pattern, not a fabrication. Nathaniel's expression did something brief and then stopped doing it. "It changes the framing, not the underlying fraud. The Bauer evaluation is still forged. The payment records still show—" "I know what it still shows," she said, "but in front of a family court judge who's already sympathetic to Vincent, it creates reasonable doubt. It gives them a story." She looked at him. "A story is all a judge needs to hesitate." She brought the phone back to her ear. "Get the recorder and get out. Don't take anything else." "Already got it," Lucas said. "We're leaving now." She ended the call. The warehouse held them both in its industrial quiet. Nathaniel put his hand on the table and looked at the wall, and she watched him think. She had learned his thinking face in 3 weeks of planning sessions at Margaret's kitchen table, the specific quality of his stillness when he was moving fast internally. "The real evaluation doesn't destroy us," he said. "No. But it means the testimony has to be perfect, yours especially." He looked at her. "When you take that stand—" "I know," she said. "They're going to use every session, every word you said in that room. They're going to frame it as evidence of instability that predates the marriage." "I know. And you're going to have to sit there and—" "Nathaniel." She said it quietly, without sharpness. Just his name. He stopped. "I spent 6 years as an ER nurse. I have sat with people in the worst hours of their lives, and I have not looked away, and I have not performed calm. I have been calm, because calm is what the situation required." She met his eyes. "I know how to tell the truth under pressure. What I need is to get to a federal agent before Vincent gets to a judge. That's all I need right now." He held her gaze for a moment. Then, "Lucas and Danny will be back in 15 minutes. We go straight to Carver." "Yes." she said. She sat down with Emma, and she did not think about the judge and the jurisdiction without extradition complications. She did not think about 18 months ago, about the small northwestern office where she had sat across from a woman whose last name she barely remembered now, and had described, haltingly and with shame she no longer felt but had felt then, the way her life was disappearing into someone else's shape. She did not think about those 6 sessions being read back to her in a courtroom by a man in an expensive suit. She thought about Emma's first breath, which she had heard from the operating table, small and rough and outraged and completely, ferociously alive. She thought, not today. Basham. Lucas and Danny came through the side entrance at 11:47, moving fast. Danny slightly ahead with the voice recorder in his hand and his face doing something complicated. Lucas was behind him, scanning the stairwell as he came in, and Claire registered immediately from the quality of Lucas's body language that the 30 minutes had not been entirely smooth. "What happened?" she said. "We were leaving," Lucas said. "The secondary office. Just as we were going out, someone came in. Not Moss. A paralegal named Kevin something. Young guy." He set his bag down. "He saw us." "Did he recognize Danny?" "Yes," Danny said. He knows me. I told him I was there to pull a document for Moss. He seemed to accept it." He paused. "But he saw me leaving with the recorder." "Did he know what it was?" "It was labeled," Danny said. He set the recorder on the table, a small digital unit, the kind that could sit in a kitchen drawer for months without anyone looking twice at it. On the side, in Margaret's neat handwriting on a strip of masking tape, V. Jan Conversations. "He saw the label," Lucas said. "He was 3 feet away." The room absorbed this. "How long before he tells someone?" Nathaniel said. "An hour," Danny said. "Maybe less. Kevin is careful and he's loyal to the firm. The moment he processes what he saw, he'll call Moss." "Then we have an hour," Nathaniel said. He was already on his phone. "Carver, Federal Field Office, Roosevelt Road. We go now, all of us." He looked at Claire. "Can you travel with Emma for the next 4 hours without stopping?" "Yes." "All right." He was dialing. He turned slightly away, phone at his ear. Claire heard it connect, heard him give his name, heard the brief authoritative exchange of a man who had been vetted and was expected. He came back. "Carver will see us at 1 o'clock. He's clearing his afternoon." 1 o'clock, Lucas said. He looked at his watch. "We have time." "We have exactly enough time," Nathaniel said, which was not the same thing, and everyone in the room understood the distinction. They moved. They took 2 cars. Nathaniel drove Claire and Emma, Danny in the back. Lucas followed in his car. The route to Roosevelt Road was 40 minutes in late morning traffic, and Claire sat in the front with Emma in the carrier and watched the city and tried to keep her mind from running the scenario where Kevin the paralegal called Moss the moment they left the building, and Moss called his CPD contacts, and those contacts ran the plates on both vehicles, and the black SUV appeared in the mirror before they ever reached. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it and felt her stomach drop entirely through the seat. The screen showed a number she had seen exactly once before in the contact list of a phone she had left charging on a nightstand in the DeLuca mansion. Vincent's personal cell. He had her clean number. She looked at the screen for the 3 seconds it took to decide. She answered, "Claire." His voice was exactly as she remembered it, precise, controlled. Without the performance of anger because he had never needed to perform it, the anger was always underneath, structural, architectural, a load-bearing element of who he was. "You've had quite a morning." She said nothing. "I know where you're going," he said. "I want you to think carefully about that." "You don't know where I'm going." "Carver," he said. "Tom Carver, supervisory agent, Chicago field office. I know Nathaniel has been building toward him for weeks." A pause. "Carver is a good agent, very thorough, very committed." Another pause, calibrated for effect. "He was also the agent who signed off on a surveillance warrant 3 years ago that used evidence gathered from a confidential informant who turned out to be on my payroll. That warrant resulted in the wrongful prosecution of a man named Gerald Tate, who spent 11 months in pretrial detention before the charges collapsed. He let that sit. Carver doesn't know that. But the moment he opens a formal investigation connected to my name, certain documents are going to surface that make his prior involvement in the Tate case very interesting to his supervisors. He paused. His career ends, and your case becomes associated with a compromised investigation from the start. Nathaniel was watching the road. She could see from the angle of his head that he was listening. You're bluffing, she said. I never bluff, Vincent said. You know that. You lived with me for 3 years. She thought about 3 years, about the way he moved through rooms, about the way he never raised his voice because he never needed to, about the way he had looked at her in the delivery room when she was losing blood, assessing, recalibrating, determining what her survival was worth to the larger operational picture. He had not been afraid for her. He had been calculating. What do you want? She said. I want Emma, he said. I want you to bring my daughter back, and I want this to end before it becomes something neither of us can control. She's not a possession. She has my name. She has her own name, Claire said. Emma, not DeLuca, not yours. Hers. The line was quiet for a moment. You found the legal documents, he said, and it was not a question. You found the trust amendment. You think you understand what I was planning. His voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more precise, the way a blade is more precise than a club. You don't understand all of it. You understand the parts someone chose to show you. She felt something cold move through her. What does that mean? It means someone put that envelope in your mailbox, he said. And you trusted it, and you ran. He paused. And now you're in a car with Nathaniel Hawthorne, who's been managing this situation very carefully from the beginning, and I want you to ask yourself, carefully, Claire, because you are an intelligent woman, what Nathaniel gets out of this. I'm telling you to ask the question. His voice was flat now, stripped of the performance of civility, just the fact underneath. Ask him what his relationship is to Richard Moss. Ask him when the Hawthorne Foundation first contracted with Northwestern Memorial. Ask him why a man who met you once, 4 years ago, in an emergency room, spent 4 weeks trying to reach a mafia boss's wife. The line crackled slightly. And then decide whether the man driving your car is saving you or delivering you. He ended the call. The car was completely silent. She was aware of her own breathing, of Emma's weight, of the city outside the windows, of Nathaniel's hands on the steering wheel, steady, relaxed, the hands of a man in control of a vehicle, and she had always assumed of himself. She said, "Pull over. Claire, pull over." Not loud, but he heard the specific quality of it, and he pulled over. They were on a side street in Pilsen. Lucas pulled in behind them. The 2 cars sat at the curb and the city went on around them, and Claire turned in her seat and looked at Nathaniel directly. He knew your name, she said. He knew about Carver. He knew you've been building toward Carver for weeks. Nathaniel held her gaze. He has resources. He said to ask you what your relationship is to Richard Moss. A pause. Not long. 3 seconds. But 3 seconds from a man who had answered every question she had ever put to him without 3 seconds of pause. I know Richard Moss, Nathaniel said. I've known him for 12 years. He sat on the board of the Hawthorne Foundation until 2 years ago when I removed him over a disagreement about the foundation's direction. He held her eyes. When I discovered the neonatal record discrepancies in Emma's case, I knew Moss was connected to the DeLuca organization. I did not tell you about my prior relationship with him because I did not want it to compromise your trust in the Foundation's review. He paused. That was a mistake. I should have told you. What else? She said. What? What else didn't you tell me because you didn't want to compromise my trust? He was quiet. Emma made a small sound. Not distress, just the ambient sounds of a baby in a moving car that was no longer moving. The Foundation's contract with Northwestern, he said finally. The Neonatal Review Program. It was established 4 years ago. It receives partial institutional support from the hospital, administrative support, data access. In exchange, the Foundation provides quality assurance analysis. He stopped. That contract was negotiated while Moss was still on the Foundation board. He may have had visibility into the program's data access protocols, which means he may have known, before I discovered the discrepancies, that the Foundation's review system could flag what had been done to Emma's records. The understanding arrived in Claire's chest like something breaking open. He may have known you would find it, she said. Yes. Which means the envelope, the plan to get me out. She watched his face. Was it yours or was it his? Nathaniel's jaw was tight. It was mine, he said. The decision to reach you was mine. The Foundation's review was legitimate. The discrepancies were real. He looked at her with the directness she had trusted, and she was trying very hard right now to determine whether she was trusting it because it was trustworthy or because she needed it to be. But I cannot rule out that Moss knew I would act on what I found. I cannot rule out that this was structured in a way that anticipated my involvement. Why would Vincent want you involved? She said. Because if the case against him is built by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who has a 12-year documented relationship with his attorney, who removed that attorney from a board under disputed circumstances, that case looks contaminated. He said it without flinching. His attorneys will argue that I had a personal motive to construct evidence against him. They'll argue the Foundation's neonatal review was targeted, not routine. They'll tie me to Moss and argue the whole thing was engineered. He paused. And they won't be entirely wrong. I did have a personal motive. You saved my life. Outside, Lucas got out of his car and walked up to Nathaniel's window and knocked. Nathaniel lowered it. What's happening? Lucas said. Vincent called her, Nathaniel said. He's trying to separate us. Is it working? Claire looked at Lucas. At the specific quality of his face, the tiredness that was 4 months deep, the suspension, the paramedic who had followed a discrepancy because he could not put down its weight. She thought about what Vincent got from compromising Lucas. Nothing. Lucas had no money, no foundation, no 12-year relationship with anyone. Lucas had only his file and his anger and his paralyzed career and the radio transcript he had pulled before they could take it. She looked at Danny in the back seat. Danny Reyes with his 9-month-old daughter named Rosa. She looked at Nathaniel. Drive, she said. Claire, everything you just told me is true, she said. And we can spend the next 40 minutes talking about it, or we can spend the next 40 minutes getting to Carver before Moss gets to Moss's paralegal. She turned back to face forward. Nathaniel, it doesn't matter why you're here. You're here. The evidence is real. The recordings exist. And I have 45 minutes before Vincent's attorney files a motion that could take my daughter across a state line. She looked at him. Drive. He drove. Lucas went back to his car and followed. She did not look at her phone. She sat with her hands in her lap and Emma against her chest, and she thought about nothing except the next 40 minutes, and the office on Roosevelt Road, and the agent named Carver, who might or might not have a career-ending vulnerability that Vincent DeLuca had been holding for the right moment. She thought about 3 years of being managed, of having every resource and relationship and escape route quietly closed off before she knew to protect them. Of Vincent's particular genius, which was not violence. Violence was ordinary, violence was available to anyone, but the patience to build a structure of control so gradual that the person inside it had no single moment they could point to and say, "Here's where it happened." She thought about the voice recorder in Danny's coat pocket, Margaret's handwriting on the masking tape. V. John conversations. Her phone buzzed. A text from the blocked number that had first contacted her at the safe house above the dry cleaner. She opened it. A photograph. A parking garage. Concrete columns. Bad fluorescent light. 2 men standing near a car. One of them with his back to the camera, one of them facing it. The one facing the camera was Tom Carver. The one with his back to the camera was wearing a suit she recognized. She did not need to see his face. She had bought that suit. She had stood in the store while he tried on 3 different options, and she had said, because he had asked her, that she preferred the charcoal. Vincent DeLuca. The timestamp on the photograph was this morning. 6:52 a.m. Before Nathaniel had made the call to Carver's office. She looked at the photograph for a very long time. Then she said quietly, to no one, "He already owns him." Nathaniel looked at her. She held the phone up and let him see it from his peripheral vision, eyes still on the road, and she watched his knuckles change on the steering wheel. Not white-knuckled, just changed. The small involuntary physical response of a man absorbing a very bad piece of information while maintaining the vehicle's speed. "He knew we were going to Carver," she said. "He's already been there." "When was that taken?" This morning, before your call. Nathaniel said nothing for several seconds. Then, we need a different agent. How long to identify one we can trust? I don't know. Moss is filing tonight. I know. Then we don't have time to vet someone new from scratch. She looked at the photograph again, then at the city, then at the federal courthouse, which she could see from the expressway. The clean institutional geometry of it against the January sky, the flag above it, the entire apparatus of a system that was supposed to exist for situations exactly like this one, and that Vincent DeLuca had apparently spent considerable effort and money making unusable for her specifically. There's another way. Nathaniel glanced at her. The courthouse, she said. Not Carver. Not the field office. The U.S. District Court. She was thinking as she spoke, laying it out in real time because there was no time for anything else. We filed directly. Emergency motion for a federal protective order under the Violence Against Women Act. Interstate custody coercion, fraud, medical record tampering. We don't go through an agent. We go straight to a federal judge. She paused. We need a lawyer. Patricia Vance? Nathaniel said immediately. Is she licensed for federal filings? No, but she has a referral. He was already reaching for his phone. A federal civil rights attorney named Sandra Okafor. She's done this before. Emergency protective orders and custody fraud cases. Patricia has used her twice. Call her. He called her. Sandra Okafor answered on the second ring, which was either luck or the specific result of Patricia Vance having already called ahead, which Claire thought was possibly what Patricia Vance did at all times, ran slightly ahead of the crisis, positioning the next resource before it was needed. The quiet infrastructure of a woman who had spent years moving people through impossible situations. Nathaniel explained in 45 seconds. He was very good at 45 seconds. Sandra said, "How much documentation do you have?" Claire took the phone. A voice recording of the target describing his plan to forge psychiatric records and manipulate family court proceedings. Financial documents tracing payment to the forger through 4 shell companies. Altered hospital records with a chain of access. A falsified intake record from a paramedic transport with the original radio transcript. Testimony from a firm associate with direct knowledge of the custody motion timeline. She paused. And the forged psychiatric evaluation itself. Sandra was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Where are you right now? She said. Pilsen. In a car. Can you be at my office on South Dearborn in 20 minutes? Yes. Then come now. Don't stop. Her voice was brisk and entirely without drama. I've done emergency federal filings in 4 hours. It's not comfortable, but it's done. A pause. And whoever is driving, lose any vehicles following you. If DeLuca has CPD contacts, assume you've been flagged. Understood, Claire said. She handed the phone back to Nathaniel. He ended the call and immediately looked in the mirror. Both mirrors, the practiced multi-point check of someone who had learned to be careful long before this morning. Blue Dodge, he said. 3 cars back. It's been with us since Kedzie. Claire did not turn around. How sure are you? Sure enough. He checked again. Lucas is behind us. I'm going to take the next right. If the Dodge follows, we have a problem. He took the next right. She counted to 5. Still there, he said. He accelerated. The city compressed around them. Residential streets, parked cars on both sides. The narrower geography of the south side giving everything a closer, more immediate quality. Nathaniel drove without speaking, both hands on the wheel, making turns with the controlled efficiency of a man who was not panicking and was also not pretending there was nothing to panic about. Her phone rang. Lucas. Blue Dodge. I've got eyes on it. 2 occupants. Brennan Associates, she said. Probably. They're not trying to be invisible. He paused. Which means they're not here to be invisible. They're here to track destination. They already know we're heading to the federal courthouse. Then why follow? She thought about it for 1 second. To confirm we actually get there. She thought about it for 1 more second, or to intercept us before we do. The street ahead opened onto a wider arterial road, and Nathaniel pushed through a yellow light, and the Dodge hit the intersection on red and had to stop for the cross traffic, and for approximately 45 seconds they were ahead of it, just ahead, the gap that was either enough or wasn't. Nathaniel's phone rang through the car speakers. An unknown number. He accepted it. A man's voice. Flat. Professional. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'm going to ask you to pull over." Nathaniel said nothing. He drove. "We don't have interest in the woman or the child," the voice said. "We have interest in the materials removed from the Moss firm's secondary office this morning. The recorder and its contents are property of a client of the firm, and their removal was unauthorized. If you return them, this ends here." "This doesn't end here," Nathaniel said. He sounded calm. Genuinely calm in a way that she recognized as not performed. A man who had made his decision and was simply executing it. "Mr. Hawthorne." He ended the call. The car was silent except for Emma, who had woken up at some point in the preceding minutes and was making the sounds that preceded crying, the preliminary noises of an infant building toward a demand. "She needs to eat," Claire said. 12 minutes, Nathaniel said. "Okafor's office, 12 minutes. She's going to cry." "I know." "Keep driving." She put her hand against Emma's chest and she felt the heartbeat. Fast, insistent, the heartbeat of someone who needed something and had no mechanism for patience. And she said quietly against the baby's ear, "Almost there. I've got you. Almost there." Behind them, the Dodge had cleared the intersection and was visible again 3 cars back. Ahead, through the windshield, the city opened up toward the federal courthouse district, toward Sandra Okafor's office on South Dearborn, toward the specific 4 hours of work that stood between Emma Rose DeLuca and a judge's signature in a jurisdiction without extradition complications. Nathaniel said, "There's a man on the corner ahead. He's watching us." Claire looked. A man on the sidewalk, phone to his ear, eyes on the car, not moving, just watching. "Brennan's got us bracketed," Lucas said through the car speakers. He had been listening the whole time, front and back. "They're going to try to box us at the next light." "Not the next light," Nathaniel said. "I know this block." He turned hard left into a parking structure. Not the entrance, the service entrance, the narrow ramp that was technically for authorized vehicles only, and that he apparently knew about because he drove it without hesitation, ducking under the clearance bar as it clipped the roof of the car with a sound like a gunshot. Emma started crying. The parking structure was dark and concrete and smelled like exhaust, and the car moved up 2 levels fast, tires on the ramp echoing, and Nathaniel cut the engine in a spot on the 3rd level, and they sat in the sudden. The parking structure held them in its concrete dark, and Emma was crying, and the sound of it bounced off the walls and came back at them from every direction, amplified, insistent, the sound of something alive that needed something and would not be quiet about it. Claire got out of the car. She stood between the car and the wall, and she held Emma against her shoulder, and she walked the small tight circuit that mothers walk. 3 steps, turn, 3 steps, turn. And she made the sounds that are not words, but are older than words. And Emma's crying slowed, hitched, slowed again, and then stopped. Nathaniel got out. He stood near the front of the car and listened. The parking structure was quiet now, except for the distant city sounds coming up through the concrete. Traffic, a siren somewhere, the ordinary noise of a world that did not know or care what was happening on the 3rd level of this structure. Lucas pulled in 30 seconds later, engine off, and got out and came around to where they were standing. "The Dodge went past the entrance," he said. "They didn't follow us in. They'll be watching the exits," Nathaniel said. "Yes." Lucas looked at Claire. "Emma okay?" "She's okay." Claire kept moving, kept the small circuit, Emma's face against her neck. "How many exits does this structure have?" 4, Nathaniel said. "Ground level. One of them exits onto an alley that connects to Dearborn 2 blocks from Okafor's building." He paused. "If we go on foot, we're not a vehicle they can track. We're people. 4 people and an infant on foot in the loop," Lucas said. 3 people, Danny said. He had gotten out of Nathaniel's car without anyone noticing and was standing at the edge of the group. His face had the look of a decision already made. "I'll take Nathaniel's car out the main entrance, slow. Give them something to follow." He looked at Claire. "By the time they figure out you're not in it, you'll be at Okafor's door." The group was quiet. "They'll stop you," Lucas said. "I know. Brennan Associates stops you. Best case, they hold you for an hour asking questions. Worst case, I know what the worst case is," Danny said. He said it without drama, without the performance of courage, just a man stating the parameters of a choice he had already made. I put the envelope in her mailbox. I took the recorder. Whatever comes with that, I've been carrying it since this morning. He looked at Claire. Rosa is 9 months old. Go. Claire looked at him. She thought about the alley, the jacket that wasn't warm enough, the specific texture of a person who has frightened themselves with their own decision and gone through with it anyway. She said, "Thank you." He nodded once. He got in Nathaniel's car. The three of them went down the stairwell on foot, Claire with Emma in the carrier, Nathaniel with the bags, Lucas slightly ahead checking each landing, and out through the alley exit into the January cold and the 2 blocks to Sandra Okafor's office, moving fast without running, the particular pace of people who could not afford to look like they were fleeing. Behind them, somewhere in the city, a black Dodge followed a car that did not contain what it was looking for. Sandra Okafor's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old paper and radiator heat, and had an elevator that took 45 seconds per floor. She met them at the door, a woman in her late 40s, compact and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the specific energy of someone who had been doing difficult things for a long time and had no patience left for anything that wasn't the actual problem. She looked at Claire, at Emma, at the bags. "Come in," she said. "Start talking." They talked for 22 minutes. Sandra listened with a yellow legal pad and a pen that she used constantly, not taking notes but drawing connections, lines between names, circles around dates, arrows indicating direction of evidence. She asked 7 questions, each of them surgical, each of them aimed at the precise structural weakness of what they were presenting. At the end, she said, "The recording." Danny had left the recorder with Lucas before taking the car. Lucas set it on the desk. Sandra pressed play. Vincent's voice filled the office. Clear, unhurried, the voice of a man who believed himself to be in a private conversation, which was the only condition under which Vincent DeLuca allowed himself to be fully legible. He was speaking to Moss. The conversation was dated 3 weeks prior. He described the psychiatric evaluation, the timeline, the custody motion, the out-of-state judge. He used the word eliminate once in reference to Claire's parental rights, and he said it with the same tone he might use to discuss a line item in a budget. Sandra stopped the recording. She looked at Claire. "This is enough," she said. "This alone is enough. Everything else is architecture around it." She picked up her phone. "I'm calling Judge Patricia Reyes. She handles emergency federal protective orders in this district. She owes me nothing, but she's honest, which is the only thing I need." She looked at Nathaniel. "I need your foundation's documentation of the neonatal record alterations in a format I can attach to the filing. How fast?" 30 minutes, Nathaniel said. "You have 20. She was already dialing. "And somebody get this woman something to eat. She looks like she's been running since 4 in the morning." "Since 3:15, Claire said. Sandra paused with the phone at her ear and looked at her with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite admiration, but lived in the territory between them. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly. "Let me do the next part." Claire sat down. She sat in a chair in Sandra Okafor's office with Emma in her arms, and she listened to Sandra talk to a federal judge in the clipped, precise language of a woman presenting facts to another woman who understood facts, and she felt something she had not felt in so long that she did not immediately recognize it. She felt, provisionally and carefully, and without trusting it entirely, that someone else was carrying the weight for a few minutes. She let them. The emergency protective order was signed at 4:47 in the afternoon. Richard Moss filed his custody motion at 4:51. 4 minutes. Sandra called Claire with both pieces of information in the same sentence, her voice carrying the specific dry satisfaction of a lawyer who had won a race she had run before and knew the margin was never comfortable and didn't need it to be. "The federal order supersedes his state motion," Sandra said. "Any action in family court is stayed pending the federal proceeding. Emma stays with you." A pause. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has been contacted. They have Danny's materials, Lucas's file, the Foundation's documentation, and the recording. They're opening a formal investigation." Another pause. "Vincent DeLuca is going to be arrested. Not tonight. These things take the time they take. But it's moving." Claire was sitting on the floor of Sandra's office, with her back against the wall and Emma asleep across her thighs. She had been sitting this way for 2 hours while the machinery of the federal proceeding moved around her. How long? She said. The investigation? Months. The trial, if it goes to trial, longer. Sandra's voice was even. I want you to understand that this is not finished today. He will have attorneys that cost more per hour than most people make in a year. He will contest every piece of evidence. He will argue contamination, argue motive, argue the Foundation's relationship with Moss. It will be hard, and it will be long, and there will be days when it feels like the system is working against you. I know, Claire said, but the recording holds, in Vincent's own voice. That's the foundation everything else is built on, and it does not move. A pause. And you're out. Emma's out. The federal order protects you. Yes, Claire said. Get some sleep tonight, Sandra said. We have work tomorrow. She ended the call. Lucas was sitting in a chair across the room, his elbows on his knees, his head down. He had been in that position for a while. Not asleep, just still. The particular stillness of a body that has been running on urgency for hours and has finally been given permission to stop. She said, Lucas? He looked up. It's done, she said. For tonight. He nodded. He did not say anything. He looked at Emma asleep on her thighs, and he looked at the window, and he rubbed both hands over his face, the way men do when they are trying to locate themselves inside a moment that has not yet become real. Danny, he said. Patricia's network, Nathaniel said from across the room. He was at the desk, laptop open, the last of the Foundation's documents submitted, and the machine of his professional life slowly resuming around the edges of the day. They reached him an hour ago. Brennan's people held him for 40 minutes, asked questions, let him go when they couldn't establish he'd committed any crime they could articulate. He paused. He's with Patricia's people tonight, he and Rosa. His family is being moved to a secondary location until the investigation is underway, and Moss's firm is under scrutiny. He'll lose his job, Claire said. Yes, Nathaniel said. The Foundation will employ him if he wants it, Nathaniel said. I already made the call. The room was quiet. Outside, Chicago had moved into its early winter evening. The sky dark by 5 o'clock, the lights of the loop coming on, the city settling into the particular register of a place that does not pause for individual emergencies, that simply continues, enormous and indifferent, and full of people living their ordinary lives inside the same geography where extraordinary things were also, always happening. Claire looked at Emma. Emma slept with the absolute commitment of a 2-month-old, completely, without reservation, her small face slack and open, her hands loosely fisted at her sides. She had been carried through a parking structure and 2 blocks of January cold and 4 hours of legal proceedings, and she had slept through most of it and eaten when she needed to eat, and cried when she needed to cry, and was, on the available evidence, entirely unaware that anything unusual had happened today. Claire thought, good. She thought, let her not know. Let her have years of not knowing before she has to. Vincent DeLuca was arrested 11 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in March, outside the River North office building where he had told Claire he was spending the night in January. Claire was not there to see it. She was at Sandra Okafor's office when Sandra called with the news, and she sat with the phone in her hand after the call-in ended and looked at the wall for a long time and felt something that was not triumph and not relief and not satisfaction, because those were all emotions that belonged to the end of something, and this was not the end. This was simply the moment when the ground became somewhat more solid under her feet. She had moved, 3 weeks after the day at the parking structure, into a rental property on the North Lakefront that Patricia Vance had identified, and Sandra Okafor had legally secured against any DeLuca-affiliated claim. It was a small house, 3 rooms, a yard that was dead in January, but which Claire looked at sometimes and thought about in other seasons. Margaret Collins was in the apartment 2 blocks over, having declined Patricia's offer of something farther from the city with the particular stubbornness of a woman who had lived in Chicago for 50 years and was not leaving it for the convenience of anyone's security protocol. Margaret came for dinner twice a week. She brought food she had made in her apartment, the practical, substantial food of a woman who had cooked for people she loved for decades, and she sat at Claire's kitchen table and held Emma and talked about the neighborhood and the weather and the specific personalities of the pigeons on her windowsill. And she did not ask about the investigation or the proceedings or Vincent, not because she didn't care, but because she understood, with the particular intelligence of the very old, that there were hours in a person's life that needed to be about something other than the thing that was trying to define them. Lucas came back to emergency medicine. His suspension was lifted 6 weeks after the U.S. Attorney's Office opened the formal investigation. The medical board, faced with documented evidence that the original complaint against him had been filed as part of a coordinated fraud, reversed its findings and restored his certification with a letter that Sheila, his former partner, apparently framed and put in the break room of their station house, which was the kind of gesture that Lucas described to Claire with the specific discomfort of a person who did not know how to receive acknowledgement and was trying to learn. He stopped by the house on the lakefront occasionally. Not often. He was not someone who visited often. He was someone who showed up when there was something specific to show up for. And Claire respected that because it was honest. And honesty had become, after 3 years of its opposite, something she valued in people with an intensity that was almost physical. He came by in April with a stuffed animal for Emma, a small bear, unremarkable, the kind sold at every drugstore in the city. And he sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee Claire made and said almost nothing for 20 minutes, which was fine, and then said, "Sheila told me I saved your life in that ambulance." "You did," Claire said. "She says I should be proud of that." "You should." He looked at the bear on the table. "I keep thinking about the version where I let it go, where I listened to my supervisor and filed the discrepancy as a misremembering and went back to my shifts." He picked up the coffee. "That version exists. That version was the easy version." "But you didn't take it," Claire said. "No? Why not?" He thought about it genuinely, which she had come to understand was a quality specific to him. He did not reach for the available answer, the one that sounded right. He waited for the true one. "Because I couldn't figure out how to look at the next bad transport and take it seriously if I had already decided some of them don't matter." They sat with that for a moment. Then Emma, in the bouncer on the kitchen floor, made a loud and deliberate sound that was not yet a word, but had the distinct quality of an opinion, and Lucas looked at her, and something in his face changed. Not softened exactly, just opened slightly, the way a face opens when it encounters something that is genuinely uncomplicated in a world that mostly isn't. "She's loud," he said. "She's very loud," Claire agreed. The federal trial began in September. Claire testified on the 3rd day. She had been in courtrooms before. Depositions during the protective order proceedings, hearings, the accumulated procedural machinery of a federal case that had been building for months. She had sat across tables from attorneys who were paid to find the places where her account could be made to look imprecise. And she had answered their questions with the same quality of steadiness she had brought to emergency rooms for 6 years. Not performed, not impenetrable, just present and accurate and unwilling to be moved by pressure into saying something untrue. The courtroom was not large. It was a federal space. Wood paneling, the institutional seriousness of a room designed to communicate that what happened inside it had weight. She sat in the witness stand and looked at the gallery and saw Margaret in the 2nd row, straight-backed, her hands in her lap, watching with the attention of someone who has earned the right to see how a thing ends. She saw Lucas in the 4th row, in a shirt that was slightly too formal for him, sitting next to Sheila, who Claire had met for the first time the previous week, and who had the direct assessing quality of a person who takes in situations fast and decides quickly what she thinks about them. She saw Danny Reyes near the back, with a woman beside him who must have been his wife, both of them leaning slightly toward the front of the room, the way people lean when something matters. She looked at Nathaniel last. He was seated behind the prosecution's table, which was where the Foundation's documentation had placed him, a witness whose testimony had already been given, whose role in the preceding months had been examined and cross-examined and ultimately held up, complicated and imperfect and real. His relationship with Moss had been disclosed, had been entered into the record, had been argued over for 2 days. The defense had tried to use it, and the prosecution had contextualized it. And the truth of it, that Nathaniel had known Moss and acted anyway, that his motives were mixed and his actions were sound, that these two things could coexist, had been left for the jury to weigh the way all complicated human truths were left for juries. He met her eyes briefly when she sat down. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned to face the courtroom. The prosecutor asked her to describe her marriage to Vincent DeLuca. She described it. She did not describe it with the language of victimhood, because that was not the language that fit. She described it with the precision of a nurse documenting a case. The chronology, the mechanisms, the specific ways in which control had been established and maintained and escalated. She described the finances and the phone and the medical care and the isolation. She described the pregnancy and the NICU and the weeks in the house alone. She described finding the envelope at the mailbox with Emma strapped to her chest in the cold. She described what it felt like to read a document that described her as a danger to her own child, written by a doctor she had never met, paid for by a man who slept 4 feet away from her at night and smiled at her over breakfast, and had been, she now understood, in the process of erasing her for longer than she had known. She did not perform emotion. The emotion was simply there, in the words, in the specific weight of the facts, and the courtroom was very quiet in a way that courtrooms get quiet when the person on the stand is not giving a performance but simply telling what happened. The defense cross-examination lasted 2 hours. They used the Northwestern psychiatric evaluation, the real one, the voluntary one from 18 months prior. They used it with considerable skill, with the particular fluency of attorneys who had been paid to turn a woman's honest attempt to get help into evidence of her instability. They asked about panic attacks. They asked about emotional dysregulation. They used the clinical language with the precision of a scalpel, trying to find the place where she would flinch or deflect or contradict herself. She did not flinch. She said, "Yes, I sought help for anxiety. I did that because I was losing my sense of myself, and I thought asking for help was the appropriate response to that. I was treated, I was discharged, I was stable. The fact that I sought help does not make me unstable. It makes me someone who understood what help was for." Setkich. She paused. The document Dr. Bauer produced does not describe anything I experienced or said. It was written about a patient who did not exist. I know the difference between the two because one of them is me. The jury, which had been watching her for 2 hours, watched her say this. The defense attorney moved to the next question. There was not a next question that recovered the ground the previous answer had taken. The verdict came on a Thursday in October. Guilty on 11 counts: organized crime conspiracy, medical fraud, falsification of legal documents, witness intimidation, attempted custodial abduction across state lines, obstruction of justice, and the specific count that the prosecution had built everything else around, conspiracy to deprive a U.S. citizen of parental rights through fraud and coercion. Richard Moss pled guilty in a separate proceeding 6 weeks before the verdict, cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Dr. Franklin Bauer, whose forged psychiatric evaluation had been the mechanism of everything, lost his medical license and pled guilty to fraud. The judge in sentencing said something that made the courtroom very quiet. She said that the case had demonstrated, with particular clarity, that the most dangerous forms of abuse were the ones that built their architecture of control slowly enough that the person inside them had no single moment of rupture to point to. Only the accumulated weight of small erosions, each one deniable, each one explicable, until the person looked up one day and found that they had been completely surrounded. She sentenced Vincent DeLuca to 22 years. He stood to receive the sentence with the same quality of stillness he had always had, the stillness of a man who believed himself to be above the proceedings around him, who had always understood the world as something that could be managed and controlled. He did not look at Claire. She looked at him. She looked at him for the full duration of the sentence being read, and what she felt was not satisfaction, and was not grief, and was not the absence of grief. It was something quieter and more specific. A recognition that the thing she had been afraid of for 3 years was now a man in a suit in a federal courtroom who was going to prison. And that fear, the structural fear that had been built into her life so gradually she had stopped noticing it, was no longer load-bearing. It was just a feeling. Feelings passed. She looked away before he was escorted out. Spring came late that year, arriving in April with the specific conviction of a Chicago spring that has been held back too long. Sudden, green, almost aggressive in its warmth after the length of the winter. The yard behind the lakefront house had turned out to be larger than it looked in January. There was a section along the back fence where something had been planted years ago and had gone feral and beautiful. Tall grasses, a patch of something that Margaret identified immediately as wild bergamot and pronounced excellent. There was a stretch of grass that was more weed than grass, and that Claire had begun, on weekends, to clear and level with the slow satisfaction of physical work that produced a visible result. She was doing this on a Saturday afternoon in late April, when Emma, who had been in the bouncer on the back steps under Margaret's supervision, performed the specific maneuver that she had been building toward for 3 weeks, the gathering of every available resource of leg and will, and stood up. Not assisted, not held, not braced. Stood up, swaying on the grass. She looked at the grass under her feet with the expression of someone encountering a new fact about the world and filing it with the seriousness it deserved. Then she took 1 step, then another. Then she sat down abruptly, because 2 steps was apparently the current limit, and looked at the sky with the same serious expression. Margaret, on the steps, said nothing. She put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright. Claire was kneeling in the dirt 3 feet away, completely still, the garden gloves still on her hands, watching her daughter. She did not move for a long moment. She did not perform anything. She simply knelt in the dirt of her yard in the spring light and watched Emma sit in the grass and look at the sky. And the thing she felt was so large and so simple that she did not have a name for it and did not try to find one. Nathaniel came through the back gate. He had been coming on Saturday afternoons for 2 months. Not every Saturday, not with anything that resembled a schedule, just with the natural rhythm of a person whose presence had become part of the pattern of a life. He brought things sometimes, groceries, a book Margaret had mentioned, once a particular brand of coffee that Claire had said, in passing, she had not been able to find. He did not make these gestures large. He simply made them. He came through the gate and stopped. He saw Emma on the grass. He looked at Claire. She looked at him from her place in the dirt, with the garden gloves and the streak of soil on her forearm, and the tears she had not been aware were on her face until just now. He sat down on the back steps next to Margaret without saying anything. Margaret moved over slightly to make room. The 3 of them watched Emma on the grass, the baby sitting in the new spring light, exploring the texture of the world under her fingers, entirely absorbed and entirely unaware and entirely free. After a while, Nathaniel said, "She's going to need better shoes for that." "She's going to need shoes, period," Claire said. "She's been in socks." "I'll get shoes," he said. "You don't have to—" "I'll get shoes," he said again. Quiet. Final in the specific way that things are final when they are simply true. Margaret made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Emma put both palms flat on the grass and looked at them as if they were the most interesting thing she had ever encountered, which at this particular stage of her life they probably were. Claire pulled off 1 garden glove. She held it in her other hand. She looked at the yard, the wild bergamot at the fence, the leveled patch of cleared ground, the work that was not done and would not be done for a long time, and that she was, she understood, entirely willing to do. She thought about nothing except this: the grass, the light, her daughter's hands flat on the ground, learning what the world was made of. She did not think about the courtroom. She did not think about the mansion, or the safe, or the pearls she had left on the velvet shelf. She did not think about 19 days or 3 minutes of margin, or the cold outside the dry cleaner on a January morning when everything she had built in secret was either going to hold or it wasn't. It had held. That was the whole of it. It had held, and now it was April, and Emma was sitting in the grass, and Claire was kneeling in the dirt of her own yard with soil on her hands. And the fear that had been structural for 3 years was not structural anymore. She put her hand flat on the ground, cold still under the warmth of the surface, the earth remembering winter even as it let it go. She kept her hand there for a moment. Then she put the glove back on and turned back to the work, and the afternoon went on around her with the quiet, ordinary, hard-won sound of a life that was finally, after everything, her own.